What if you could transform your life by simply understanding a few words spoken over 2,000 years ago? These are not just any words, dear listener, but the profound teachings of Jesus Christ, known universally as the Sermon on the Mount. Delivered with a gentle authority, these words are like whispers navigating through the corridors of time, resonating even today in the hearts and minds of those who seek truth and wisdom. You see, embedded within these ancient teachings are principles that have the power to illuminate and guide us through the often shadowy paths of life. Jesus did not merely offer abstract ideas. His words are a clarion call to live with purpose, humility, and compassion. Consider, for instance, his timeless declaration, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth," Matthew chapter 5 verse 5. In an age where power and dominance are so often celebrated, this simple yet profound statement upends our usual notions of strength and success, pointing us towards a deeper, more enduring truth. Stay with us until the end of this exploration, and you will not only gain a greater understanding of these sacred teachings, but you will also be invited to join us in a heartfelt prayer. This prayer, crafted to help you incorporate the essence of Jesus' words into your daily life, promises to be a spiritual balm, offering solace and strength as you strive to live out the principles of the Sermon on the Mount. Imagine a time more than 2 millennia ago, on a serene mountainside in Galilee. A crowd gathers, eyes filled with anticipation as they await the words of a man whose teachings would transcend time and shape the course of history. This is the setting for the Sermon on the Mount, an extraordinary collection of Jesus' sermons encapsulated in the biblical texts of Matthew chapters 5 through 7. These chapters hold some of the most profound and impactful teachings in the Christian faith. They begin with the Beatitudes, a series of blessings where Jesus extols virtues that are often overlooked or undervalued by society. "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth," he says, highlighting an eternal reward for those who exhibit humility and gentleness. As the sermon unfolds, Jesus teaches his followers how to pray, introducing the Lord's Prayer, a timeless model for intimate conversation with God. "Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name," it begins, inviting us to recognize and revere the divine nature of God, while also bringing our daily needs and spiritual aspirations before him. Central to the Sermon on the Mount is the Golden Rule. "So in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you," a principle that echoes the ethical teachings of many cultures yet finds its purest expression here. This rule is not just a guideline for behavior but a profound call to empathy and selflessness. Throughout these chapters, Jesus repeatedly contrasts the old ways of the law with a new understanding that goes deeper than mere obedience to rules. He speaks of not only refraining from physical acts of violence or lust but also purifying one's heart of anger and impure thoughts. His teachings elevate the concept of righteousness, calling for an internal transformation that transcends outward compliance. The Sermon on the Mount is a masterful exposition of Christian ethics and spirituality. It calls believers to a higher standard of love, forgiveness, and humility. By the end of these chapters, Jesus leaves his audience not just with moral maxims, but with a profound sense of the values that define the kingdom of heaven. Indeed, the Sermon on the Mount transcends its historical and cultural context, speaking directly to the soul's deepest longings. It presents a portrait of a life lived in alignment with divine principles, a life marked by blessing, purpose, and profound inner peace. Imagine standing on a gentle hillside, gazing over a sea of eager faces, each one captivated by a single voice. That voice belongs to Jesus, and he is unveiling what we now hold dear as the Sermon on the Mount. This remarkable sermon, chronicled in the Gospel of Matthew chapters 5 to 7, has become a cornerstone of Jesus' teachings. It encapsulates his profound wisdom and offers a robust framework for moral and ethical conduct for his followers. The Sermon on the Mount begins with the Beatitudes, a series of blessings that turn conventional wisdom on its head. "Blessed are the poor in spirit," Jesus declares, "for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." With each beatitude, he extends an invitation to adopt values like humility, mercy, purity of heart, and peacemaking. These are not just lofty ideals but practical principles that reconfigure what it means to live a blessed life. Yet, the wisdom of Jesus doesn't stop with blessings. He dives into the deeper waters of human behavior, illuminating the inner workings of the human heart. He speaks of anger, lust, and divorce. He redefines righteousness to move beyond mere external compliance with the law to a heartfelt obedience rooted in love and integrity. Unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, he says, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Jesus also offers foundational stories, parables with layers of meaning, each one chiseling away at the listener's preconceptions. Consider the parable of the wise and foolish builders. The wise builder, Jesus teaches, constructs his house on the rock, while the foolish one builds on sand. When storms come, only the house on the rock stands firm. This parable underscores the importance of building one's life on the firm foundation of Jesus' teachings, ensuring resilience in times of trial. Another parable within the sermon is the teaching of the salt and light. You are the salt of the earth, Jesus says, but if salt loses its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? Salt in this context is not only a flavor enhancer but a preservative, symbolizing the preservative effect Christians should have on a morally decaying world. You are the light of the world, he continues, urging his followers to shine brightly, illuminating the darkness around them through good deeds that glorify the Father in heaven. Throughout the sermon, Jesus consistently reorients his followers' understanding. He introduces the golden rule. Whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them, thus distilling the essence of ethical conduct into one timeless directive. This teaching is not just about reciprocity but about initiating goodness and grace in every human interaction, a principle that deeply influences Christian ethics. Even the Lord's Prayer, found within this monumental sermon, is a masterclass in humility and dependence on God. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name, it begins, setting a tone of reverence. The prayer encompasses petitions for daily needs, forgiveness, and deliverance from evil, echoing our intertwined need for God's provision, mercy, and protection. The Sermon on the Mount, thus, is more than a collection of moral aphorisms. It is a majestic tapestry weaving together theological insights, ethical imperatives, and practical wisdom. It invites us not merely to admiration but to action, to transform our lives in accordance with the divine truths it unveils. The teachings of Jesus in this sermon are a call to live in a manner reflective of the kingdom of heaven, offering a vision of life marked by purity, humility, and relentless love. Picture yourself standing on a gentle hillside in ancient Galilee, surrounded by an eager crowd that's buzzing with anticipation. Can you feel it? The air is thick with expectation, pregnant with the possibility of revelation. This was not just any gathering but rather a defining moment in history that still resonates through the corridors of time. The stage was set against a backdrop of considerable complexity. On one hand, we had the Jewish society, steeped in millennia of traditions, customs, and laws meticulously handed down from generation to generation. Picture the devout adherents to the Torah, their lives intertwined with rituals and observances, all aimed at maintaining their covenant with Yahweh. These were people living in the tension between their spiritual aspirations and the grinding reality of daily existence. On the other hand, there was the omnipresence of the Roman Empire, a looming giant with its military might and imposing governance. The Jews lived under the shadow of Roman occupation, which brought not only administrative order but also an array of challenges. Taxation was heavy, the local rulers were more often than not puppet kings, and the sense of autonomy was but a residual fantasy of a once glorious past. This collision of influences created a milieu ripe for revolutionary ideas. Imagine the political tensions, simmering just beneath the surface, the societal norms being constantly renegotiated in the backdrop of such pervasive power dynamics. The Jewish people's desire for a promised Messiah who would deliver them from Roman oppression was at its zenith. The Sermon on the Mount, then, was delivered into this cauldron of hope, fear, and aspiration. Jesus, a carpenter's son from Nazareth, stood before an audience that spanned the socio-economic spectrum. Among them were the poor, the marginalized, and the disenfranchised, those who labored under the heavy yoke of both religious legalism and imperial oppression. Now, imagine the magnetic pull of Jesus' words, arresting the attention of fishermen, tax collectors, zealots, and ordinary folk. His teachings cut through the noise of competing ideologies and burdensome traditions, presenting a vision of life that was as radical as it was profound. The Beatitudes, with their counterintuitive blessings on the poor in spirit, the meek, the merciful, were not just soothing words but a radical blueprint for what it meant to live under God's reign. It's crucial to understand that Jesus was not merely addressing individual moral conduct but was also speaking into the collective identity of his listeners. He was calling into question the very foundations of societal values and norms. His sermon was a reassessment of what it meant to be truly righteous, offering a new paradigm that flipped conventional wisdom on its head. In doing so, Jesus created a sharp contrast to the Roman ideals of power, prestige, and conquest. His teachings offered an alternative vision, one where the last would be first, where the peacemakers would be called the sons of God, and where genuine righteousness surpassed the performative piety of the Pharisees. Through the lens of history, we see the Sermon on the Mount as not merely a collection of ethical teachings but as a revolutionary manifesto that spoke directly to the hearts and minds of those who were desperate for hope and hungry for change. Here, in this historical context, we grasp the full weight and transformative power of Jesus' words that continue to challenge and inspire us to this very day. In the grand tapestry of the Sermon on the Mount, we encounter a cast of characters, each playing a pivotal role in the unfolding story of this timeless discourse. At the heart of it all stands Jesus Christ, the central figure, whose words and actions have echoed through the corridors of history, touching lives across generations and continents. Jesus, often referred to as the Messiah, the Son of God, and the Savior, is not merely a historical figure but a living presence in the hearts of believers. His teachings on the Mount are not some esoteric code, but a clear and direct call to a higher form of existence, a life that mirrors the kingdom of heaven on earth. Through the Beatitudes, he reveals the profound and often paradoxical truths of blessedness, where the meek inherit the earth, and those who hunger and thirst for righteousness find deep fulfillment. Surrounding Jesus are his disciples, a motley group who would become the earliest carriers of his profound message. These men, from varied walks of life, each brought their own perspectives and understandings. Peter, with his brashness and eventual tenderness, John, with his deep spirituality, and Thomas, with his honest skepticism. Each represented an aspect of the human condition, reflecting the diverse nature of those Christ's message was intended for. They were not mere followers but were transformed into apostles, sent forth to spread and preserve the teachings of their Master. Through their writings, testimonies, and eventual martyrdoms, they laid down the foundation of what would become the Christian faith. Then, there are the crowds, an assorted multitude of ordinary people with extraordinary destinies. They are the seekers, the curious, the hopeful, and the desperate. It was to them that Jesus spoke words of comfort and challenge. It was among them that miracles happened, where the blind received sight, the lame walked, and the oppressed found new hope. These were the men and women who would later recount the wonder of those moments to their children and grandchildren, ensuring that the stories of the rabbi from Nazareth were never forgotten. Collectively, these figures did not merely hear the words of the Sermon on the Mount, they lived them and passed them on. Their lives, changed by those divine encounters, carried the message of hope, love, and redemption far beyond the sunny slopes of Galilee. In their varied roles, they exemplify the spirit of the sermon, a call not just to hear the words of Christ, but to dwell in them, to let them permeate every facet of life, and to become vessels through which the kingdom of God touches the world. As we reflect on their contributions, we are invited to see ourselves within this narrative, called to carry on this sacred tradition, living out the teachings of Christ in our fragmented and often weary world. The legacy of Jesus, his disciples, and the multitudes remind us that each of us, in our own unique way, can be a light in the darkness, a voice crying out in the wilderness, and a beacon of hope within our communities. Imagine yourself seated on a quiet hillside, warmed by the gentle rays of the sun. You are among the throngs gathered, listening intently as Jesus unveils teachings which would ripple through centuries, shaping faith and morals alike. This, my friends, is the Sermon on the Mount, a treasure trove of divine wisdom, perfectly encapsulated in what we term the Beatitudes. Now, you might wonder, what exactly are these Beatitudes? They are more than mere proclamations. They are blessings, divine commendations of certain virtues and dispositions. Listen closely. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Here, Jesus exalts a humble and repentant heart, one that recognizes its own spiritual poverty and relies wholly on God. Consider too. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Jesus turns our conventional wisdom on its head, suggesting that those who grieve will receive divine consolation, their sorrow transformed by the presence of God. Then he speaks of the meek, the merciful, the pure in heart, and the peacemakers, each of these underscoring a virtue cherished in the kingdom of heaven. But let us not rest here. Let us journey further into the realms of law and grace. The law, my dear listener, was given to Moses on Mount Sinai, a cornerstone for Israel's covenant with God. It was the moral compass, the bulwark of righteousness. Yet, here stands Jesus, not to abolish but to fulfill the law in its entirety. Picture this. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them but to fulfill them. In his fulfillment, the law was not rendered obsolete but rather completed. The rigorous demands of the law, which no one could fulfill perfectly, were met in the person of Jesus Christ. Grace, therefore, is not lawlessness but the embodiment of divine love that enables us to uphold the law through the Spirit. It's like receiving power from an unseen source, allowing us to tread paths of righteousness that would otherwise be impossible. The symphony of Beatitudes and the symphony of law meeting grace build up to a radiant crescendo, the kingdom of heaven. Ah, the kingdom of heaven. Not merely a distant utopia but a present reality breaking into our world. Through Jesus' teachings, we grasp principles that paint the portrait of this kingdom. It's a realm where the first are last, the last are first, where mercy triumphs over judgment, and love overcomes all barriers. In this kingdom, faith blooms like a flower, watered by purity of heart and nurtured by peacemaking. It's a place where blessedness is not conveyed through earthly measure but by divine favor. Seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, Jesus implores, and all these things will be given to you as well. To bring this closer to our grasp, let us turn to the scriptures. Matthew chapter 5 verses 3 to 12 lists the Beatitudes, offering a vision of blessedness counter to worldly expectations. Romans chapter 10 verse 4 tells us, Christ is the culmination of the law so that there may be righteousness for everyone who believes, affirming Jesus' role as the fulfillment of the law. And finally, in Matthew chapter 6 verse 33, we hear the clarion call to prioritize the kingdom, to align our hearts with heaven's rhythm. United with scriptural wisdom, scholars through the ages have sculpted our understanding of these theological treasures. Augustine spoke of the Beatitudes as progressive steps leading a soul closer to God. Aquinas pondered the harmony of law and grace, elucidating how grace empowers moral law. Modern theologians like Bonhoeffer interpreted the kingdom of heaven as a call to radical discipleship. Thus, dear listener, the teachings from that sunlit hillside continue to reverberate across time. The Beatitudes invite us to live in divine blessing. The interplay of law and grace calls us to a higher righteousness. And the kingdom of heaven offers us a vision of life that is richly abundant and eternally significant. In these teachings, we find our compass, a guide leading us not merely to know about God but to dwell intimately with Him, allowing His wisdom to transform our lives from within. Augustine, known as one of the most profound theologians in Christianity, approached the Sermon on the Mount as a blueprint for the Christian life. His interpretations emphasized the inner transformation and the virtues presented by Jesus. Augustine believed that the Beatitudes encapsulated the highest form of moral guidance and spiritual aspiration. He argued that these teachings were not just moral pointers but divine imperatives that lead believers towards a genuine communion with God. Then we have Thomas Aquinas, whose intellectual rigor brought new depth to interpreting the Sermon on the Mount. Aquinas focused on the natural law and ethics inherent in Jesus' sermon. He saw the teachings as a means to understand God's eternal law, and he profoundly dissected each beatitude, elucidating how they reflect the virtues that complete human nature. For Aquinas, the Sermon on the Mount was a guide to achieve human happiness and fulfillment, grounded in divine wisdom. Martin Luther, the progenitor of the Reformation, brought a distinctive perspective to the Sermon on the Mount. Luther viewed the sermon through the lens of grace and faith. He contended that the rigorous moral standards set by Jesus served to reveal human inadequacy and the inability to achieve righteousness through works alone. For Luther, the sermon underscored the necessity of God's grace, which justified faith and liberated believers from the impossible task of living up to the law. Other influential theologians like John Calvin and contemporary voices have also weighed in on the Sermon on the Mount. Calvin echoed many of Luther's sentiments but also stressed the transformative power of the Holy Spirit in enabling believers to follow Jesus' teachings. Modern theologians such as Dietrich Bonhoeffer deeply explored the radical and uncompromising demands of the Sermon on the Mount, presenting it as a direct call to discipleship and a life starkly different from worldly values. Each of these theological giants brought their contexts, experiences, and insights to bear on the Sermon on the Mount. Their contributions have not only shaped theological understanding but also heavily influenced Christian practice throughout history. Through them, we see a rich tapestry of insights that continue to guide and challenge believers to embody the transformative principles that Jesus laid out over 2 millennia ago. Imagine, if you will, a sprawling hillside, not unlike those we see in the gentle vistas of England, where a throng gathers to hear a man speak. This man, Jesus of Nazareth, begins to unfold a vision that seems both otherworldly and profoundly practical. His words so deeply resonate that they have been passed down through centuries, an eternal melody to the human heart. Traditional interpretations hold the Sermon on the Mount in a place of deep reverence, seeing in it ethical guidelines that are both timeless and divinely inspired. This is not merely because these teachings come from Jesus, but because they echo the eternal truths embedded in the human soul. Think of the Beatitudes. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Is there not a whisper here of a divine reciprocity, an orderliness in the moral universe, which speaks to the heart with a clarity that feels almost preordained? Theologically, these traditional views are buttressed by a multitude of scriptural citations. The ethical stances presented in the Sermon on the Mount find their parallels throughout the Bible, thus confirming their divine origin. Take, for instance, the Golden Rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. This is more than a maxim for good behavior. It is a reflection of God's character, mirrored in scriptures from Leviticus to the epistles. Furthermore, consider the theological arguments presented by scholars like Augustine or Aquinas. These luminaries did not merely accept the teachings at face value. They expounded upon them, revealing layers of meaning that point towards a God who is intensely interested in the moral development of his creations. Augustine famously grappled with the command to love one's enemies, seeing in it a radical call to a higher form of love, one that transcends human inclinations and touches upon the divine. To dismiss the Sermon on the Mount as mere metaphor or idealism misses the pointed, practical nature of its commands. The directive to turn the other cheek is not advocating for passivity but encouraging a radical form of strength and restraint, a divine paradox that compels us to consider power in terms of moral fortitude rather than physical might. One cannot overlook the evidence of lives transformed by adherence to these teachings. Historical accounts are replete with figures who, having earnestly applied the Beatitudes and other teachings, found themselves not only morally improved but spiritually enriched. From monastic communities to modern humanitarian efforts, the practical outworking of these commands can be observed in tangible, impactful ways. Thus, the traditional interpretations of the Sermon on the Mount reinforce its status as a cornerstone of Christian ethics. It affirms the conviction that these teachings are indeed timeless, offering not just a path to moral living, but an invitation to partake in the divine nature itself. Let us embark on a journey, dear reader, to explore the thoughtful discourse surrounding the challenges to traditional views of the Sermon on the Mount. In the vast tapestry of theological understanding, there exists a section woven with modern critiques that urge us to delve deeper, to question, and to reflect. Modern theological critiques, unlike their more traditional counterparts, often argue for metaphorical or contextual readings of these ancient texts. To illustrate, some scholars propose that the Beatitudes, rather than being direct commandments, might serve as profound metaphors illustrating the moral and ethical aspirations of a life devoted to the divine. They suggest that Jesus employed vivid imagery and parables not merely to outline a rigid moral code, but to awaken the spiritual imagination of his listeners, prompting them to engage in an inner transformation. The sermon's call to turn the other cheek, they argue, could be viewed as an invitation to a broader principle of nonviolence and radical forgiveness, rather than a strict legalistic directive. This perspective opens a vista where the teachings of Jesus are not confined to the literal interpretation of his words but are seen as a dynamic guide to understanding and applying deeper spiritual principles. Scholarly debates further enrich this discussion, presenting a mosaic of interpretations and implications for contemporary practice. Some modern scholars contend that the socio-political context of Jesus' time must be meticulously considered to fully grasp the nuances of his teachings. For instance, understanding the Roman occupation and Jewish expectations of a Messiah might reveal why Jesus used certain phrases and teachings, which could rectify misinterpretations that have persisted over millennia. Additionally, the scope of these discussions often extends to questions about the authenticity and originality of the content within the sermon. Did Jesus articulate these teachings precisely as recorded, or were they shaped by the community and authors who transmitted his words? Such questions encourage us to consider the possibility that the Sermon on the Mount reflects a collaborative theological effort, a synthesis of Jesus' core messages and the early church's reflections on his mission. The implications of these varied interpretations are profound. If we adopt a metaphorical or contextual reading, the application of the sermon's teachings in contemporary life becomes malleable, adaptable to our unique circumstances while retaining the essence of their spiritual guidance. This approach allows modern believers to embody the principles of the sermon in ways that resonate with their personal and communal experiences. However, this stance is not without its critics. Traditionalists often caution against moving too far from the textual fidelity of the Gospels. They argue that maintaining the direct, unaltered teachings of Jesus is crucial for preserving the integrity and intended impact of his words. Yet, the beauty of this ongoing scholarly debate lies in its ability to enrich our understanding and deepen our faith. By engaging with these modern perspectives, we are invited to revisit and reflect upon the Sermon on the Mount with fresh eyes, to rediscover its enduring wisdom and its capacity to speak to every generation. In conclusion, dear reader, while challenges to traditional views may provoke thoughtful examination and sometimes discomfort, they also grant us the opportunity to see the profound teachings of Jesus through a multifaceted lens. Whether one leans towards a traditional, metaphorical, or contextual reading, the ultimate goal remains: to draw nearer to the heart of Jesus' message and to embody its transformative power in our daily lives. In our journey through the teachings of the Sermon on the Mount, it becomes paramount to cast our eyes beyond the immediate texts and explore the vast tapestry of ethical and moral teachings woven throughout humanity's diverse spiritual heritage. One might observe, with a sense of awe and wonder, that the core principles Jesus espoused find resonance in the hearts of other religious traditions. Though their origins, narratives, and rituals might differ markedly, the echoes of compassion, humility, and righteousness can be discerned across the annals of time and geography. Consider, for instance, the venerable wisdom of Buddhism. In the Buddha's teachings, we uncover the Eightfold Path, a map guiding adherence towards right speech, right action, and right livelihood among other virtues. These precepts, not unlike the Beatitudes, advocate for a life rooted in ethical conduct, compassion, and the pursuit of inner purity. One envisages the compassionate heart of a bodhisattva mirroring the mercy celebrated by Christ. Turning our gaze upon Hinduism, the Bhagavad Gita offers its pearls of truth. Krishna's discourse on dharma, duty and righteousness, urges individuals to act selflessly, without attachment to the fruits of their actions. Just as Jesus called his followers to embody the spirit of servitude and humility, Krishna's exhortation champions living in alignment with divine will and universal duty. Islam, with its call to submission to the will of Allah, presents the 5 pillars as a testament to faith and ethical living. The pillars, professing faith, prayer, almsgiving, fasting, and pilgrimage, reflect a framework that fosters a close relationship with God and a life of integrity and compassion towards others. The spirit of generosity and self-discipline within Islam finds a kindred spirit in the teachings of almsgiving and prayer found within Jesus' sermon. Lastly, the Torah, the sacred text of Judaism, commands a life of holiness and righteousness. The teachings, from the 10 Commandments to the ethical injunctions of the prophets, underscore the necessity of justice, mercy, and humility. Micah's prophetic call to do justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God echoes a symphony harmonious with Jesus' own call to blessed meekness and purity of heart. Through this comparative lens, one cannot miss the underlying current of ethical unity that courses through the world's great religions. Each, in its unique way, calls its adherents to a higher ethical standard, a life marked by ethical integrity, compassion for the needy, and a profound respect for the divine order. As C.S. Lewis might muse, perhaps this confluence of moral teachings is no mere coincidence but a hint of a deeper, universal truth imprinted upon the human heart. Despite the chasm of time, culture, and creed, the fundamental call to live virtuously and seek the divine remains a common, unyielding thread. In these harmonies, one perceives the faint yet powerful whispers of a shared humanity yearning for transcendence, forever woven into the fabric of our existence. Imagine for a moment, stepping back through the tapestry of time, treading the sandy paths and rocky ways where Jesus himself walked among men. As we embark on this journey, we are met by the remarkable realm of archaeological discoveries, tangible touchstones to the very heart of the historical Jesus and the Sermon on the Mount. These artifacts, these remnants of the ancient world, weave a narrative that breathes life into the hallowed stories of the Gospels. First, let's speak of the places where these hallowed words were spoken. The Sermon on the Mount is traditionally believed to have taken place on a hill in northern Israel near the Sea of Galilee. Recent archaeological endeavors have uncovered remains of ancient towns and synagogues in this region, aligning significantly with the accounts detailed in the New Testament. Excavations at sites such as Capernaum and Bethsaida reveal structures and artifacts dating back to the 1st century, the very era in which Jesus ministered. The unearthing of coins, pottery, and tools from these locations provides a lens through which we can gaze upon the daily existence of those who gathered to hear Jesus' words. One of the most compelling discoveries is that of the House of Peter in Capernaum. Here, archaeologists have identified structures beneath a 4th century church which evidence suggests as the very dwelling where Peter lived and, perhaps, where Jesus stayed during his ministry. Inscriptions and carvings found at the site offer profound insights, rendering a closer connection between the sacred scriptures and historical reality. Delving deeper into the ancient text, we find that recent digs at Magdala, the supposed home of Mary Magdalene, have unearthed a 1st century synagogue. Remarkably preserved, this synagogue contains a unique stone carving, potentially depicting the Second Temple of Jerusalem. Such findings not only affirm the gospel references but illuminate the devout religious practices and the communities Jesus addressed. Beyond places, let's consider the vestiges of culture and creed preserved through the sands of time. Artifacts such as the Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered in the mid-20th century near Qumran, may not pinpoint the Sermon on the Mount itself but serve as invaluable context. These ancient texts, which include fragments of nearly every book of the Hebrew Bible, date back to the time of Jesus and exhibit beliefs and traditions that parallel his teachings. They provide a rich backdrop of Jewish thought and expectation, against which Jesus' revolutionary words resonated. Furthermore, there are ossuaries, or bone boxes, discovered within Judea which bear inscriptions mentioning prominent figures from the New Testament, including Caiaphas, the high priest involved in Jesus' trial. These ossuaries provide a corporeal link to the era, augmenting our understanding of this historical period when Jesus spoke of humility, mercy, and righteousness. Each shard of pottery, each inscribed stone, whispers of an era steeped in divine narrative and human experience. Together, these archaeological discoveries weave a compelling testimony. They do not merely corroborate the existence of places and people mentioned in the Gospels. They ground the ethereal teachings of the Sermon on the Mount in the dust and stone of reality. They serve as silent witnesses to the profoundly transformative message that Jesus imparted. Imagine an ancient hillside, verdant and still, framed by the shimmering waters of a serene lake. Picture a man, his words resonating with power and grace, reaching out not only through the crowd gathered in awe but through the corridors of history to touch hearts across millennia. Through these archaeological treasures, we garner more than mere historical credibility. We gain a deeper, richer connection to the man behind the words, to Jesus, the embodiment of divine love and wisdom. Thus, as we stand on the threshold of past and present, the weight of these discoveries invites us to engage with the gospel accounts not as distant myths but as living, breathing chapters of a continuing story. They call us to witness, once more, the Sermon on the Mount, a beacon of truth that shines brightly from the hills of Galilee to the very edges of our own lives today. In the realm of theological scholarship, the Sermon on the Mount has long been a subject of intense examination and vibrant debate. Esteemed scholars from various disciplines have ardently discussed the authenticity and originality of the sermon's content, each bringing forth a cascade of intriguing ideas and thoughtful critiques. This discourse is not only essential for an enriched understanding of Jesus' teachings but also pivotal for comprehending the profound impact of these words on Christian doctrine and practice. Some scholars argue fervently in favor of the authenticity of the sermon, contending that the words recorded in the Gospels are a faithful account of Jesus' teachings. They provide ample evidence from historical and textual analysis, pointing out the sermon's consistency with Jesus' known style and the historical context in which he lived. These proponents maintain that the sermon's ethical and moral codes are deeply rooted in the Jewish traditions of Jesus' time, thereby affirming its genuineness and originality as his work. Throughout history, this perspective has been upheld by numerous theological giants. They have meticulously analyzed the sermon, supporting the view that its teachings are not only original but also revolutionary. The sheer depth and resonance of the Beatitudes, the intricate weaving of ethical imperatives, and the profound exhortations to love, mercy, and humility are cited as hallmarks of a singular divine voice. These scholars assert that such profound wisdom and clarity could only originate from Jesus himself. On the other side of the debate, some scholars propose that the Sermon on the Mount is a composite document, possibly compiled by early Christian leaders or communities. They argue that this compilation was intended to encapsulate the core teachings of Jesus in a structured and memorable format. This perspective is supported by the observation of similar teachings appearing across different parts of the Gospels, suggesting that the sermon as we have it may be an edited anthology rather than a verbatim account. The skeptics point to variances in how the sermon is presented in different Gospel accounts, particularly between Matthew and Luke. These differences, they argue, indicate a degree of editorial intervention and adaptation to suit the theological and pastoral needs of varying early Christian communities. Furthermore, some contend that certain elements of the sermon reflect post-resurrection understanding and theological development, implying that the teachings were adapted to address issues and challenges faced by the early church. This scholarly divergence creates a fascinating tapestry of perspectives where tradition and critical inquiry intertwine. The discussions often delve into the literary analysis, comparing the structure and language of the sermon with Jewish wisdom literature and rabbinic teachings. By doing so, they attempt to understand whether the sermon reflects a uniquely Jesus-oriented ethos or a broader Jewish ethical paradigm reinterpreted by his followers. Moreover, there are those who adopt a more middle ground approach, suggesting that while Jesus' original teachings form the sermon's foundation, the version we possess today may have undergone some degree of editorial shaping. This viewpoint acknowledges the potential for both authentic teaching and community adaptation, recognizing the dynamic interplay between Jesus' words and their preservation through oral and written traditions. These academic debates, while at times contentious, ultimately enrich our understanding of the Sermon on the Mount. They invite us to explore the multifaceted dimensions of Jesus' teachings, their historical context, and their enduring legacy. Whether viewed as the unaltered words of Christ or as a carefully curated set of his core teachings, the sermon remains a cornerstone of Christian ethical and moral philosophy, inspiring countless generations to seek a higher path of righteousness and compassion. In the rolling hills of Galilee, far from the bustling cities, a humble man spoke words that would echo through the corridors of time. But woven into his profound teachings were tales of the miraculous, events where the natural order seemed elegantly brushed aside by the divine hand. These miracles, siblings to the sublime wisdom of the Sermon on the Mount, served as both a testament to his authority and a glimpse into the transcendent reality he heralded. Consider the leper, shunned and loathed by society, his skin a testament to his suffering. In a scene so earnest it seems almost mythical, Jesus reaches out, and with a touch, an act as intimate as it is revolutionary, the man's skin is restored, smooth and pure. The crowd, murmuring in awe, witnesses not just a healing but a rebuke of societal rejection, a lesson that mirrors the beatitude, "Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy." Then, there is the centurion's servant, bound by the chains of paralysis, twisted in pain. The centurion, a figure of authority and emblem of the Roman presence, recognized in Jesus a power eclipsing his own. He pleaded, not from the haughty stance of a commander, but with the humility born of despair. Jesus' words, "Go, it shall be done for you as you have believed," unravel the knots of suffering without even a physical touch. Is this not a living parable of faith fitting seamlessly with, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness"? Along the storm-swept Sea of Galilee, Jesus calmed the tempest with a mere rebuke. "Peace, be still," he commanded, and the chaos of wind and waves subsided into profound calm. This not only demonstrated his sovereignty over creation but unfolded layers of trust and faith as he proclaimed in the sermon, "Do not be anxious about tomorrow, for tomorrow will be anxious for itself." Yet, for every eye-widening miracle, the skeptical mind seeks a foothold in reason and natural law. Science stands at the threshold, reluctant yet curious. Some propose psychosomatic explanations, asserting that faith and expectation trigger inexplicable recoveries. They speak of placebo effects, of how belief alone can wield influence over the body's ailment. Jesus, aware of the human heart, time and again said, "Your faith has made you well." Theologically, scholars delve deeply. They argue that these miracles were not mere wonders to awe the masses but were signs pointing to deeper truths: the inbreaking of God's kingdom, a reversal of the fall, and an embodiment of divine compassion. Augustine, Aquinas, and Luther would align, each in their distinct eloquence, interpreting miracles as both literal and symbolic, a dual testament to God's care for temporal needs and eternal souls. Miracles, then, in the context of the Sermon on the Mount, are a dynamic interplay between word and deed. They tangibly demonstrate the kingdom values Jesus extolled in his discourse: the restoration of the broken, the primacy of faith over fear, and the unprecedented inclusion of the marginalized. Each miracle parallels his teachings, offering a narrative to bolster the doctrine, a story to animate the sermon. Listeners to the sermon may have heard words that called them salt of the earth and light of the world, but in witnessing the miracles, they saw the embodiment of these metaphors. The miraculous events were divine whispers of the extraordinary potential nestled within the ordinary. They were harbingers of a new covenant, a beckoning towards a fuller understanding of reality where the divine intersects with the mundane. So, as we reflect on these supernatural occurrences, their scientific scrutiny, and theological implications, let us not be quick to compartmentalize or cynically dismiss. Instead, let them be an invitation to a deeper journey, where faith and reason step in tandem, enriching one another rather than standing in opposing ranks. The miraculous, then, stands not merely as an antiquated relic but as an ever-relevant testament to a God who intervenes, who heals, and who speaks amidst the storm. Imagine, if you will, a gentle whisper calling across the vast expanse of time, a voice drenched in wisdom and compassion, emanating from the slopes of a hill in ancient Judea. The Sermon on the Mount, perhaps the most sublime and profound discourse ever uttered, continues to echo through the corridors of history, resonating deeply within the hearts and minds of believers. It asks not for comprehension, but for transformation, a reorientation of one's soul towards an imitable ideal. The influence of these teachings is as undeniable as it is pervasive. Within the individual, the Sermon on the Mount acts as a mirror, reflecting both our highest aspirations and our most hidden shortcomings. It beckons us towards a life marked by humility, mercy, purity, and peacemaking. In a world rife with conflict and selfish ambition, these principles stand as a radical counterculture, a beacon of divine light guiding us towards the kingdom of heaven. Consider the Beatitudes, those paradoxical blessings that offer comfort to the poor in spirit and the persecuted. They invert our worldly expectations, suggesting that true happiness is found not in material wealth or status, but in spiritual depth and righteousness. This profound insight has led many individuals to reevaluate their lives, abandoning the relentless pursuit of earthly success for a higher, eternal goal. Personal testimonies abound of souls finding solace in their spirit's poverty, peace in their mourning, and fulfillment in their hunger and thirst for righteousness. One cannot overlook the collective transformation inspired by this sermon. The principles outlined by Jesus set the foundation for Christian ethics and practice, influencing communities and institutions over centuries. Churches, charities, and movements for social justice frequently draw upon the Sermon on the Mount as their guiding star. It has inspired countless acts of kindness, selflessness, and service, bringing to life the notion of loving one's neighbor as oneself. In contemporary settings, the teachings continue to mold lives in extraordinary ways. Take, for example, the story of a modern-day peacemaker, an ordinary individual who, faced with personal loss and injustice, chose forgiveness over vengeance. Inspired by the words, "Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy," they forgave their transgressors and, in doing so, found liberation from the chains of bitterness. Their story, shared widely, has encouraged others to follow suit, transforming hearts and healing relationships. Or consider the individual who, in the pursuit of a deeper faith, embraced the principle of turning the other cheek. In their daily life, this led to numerous acts of grace under fire, choosing patience in place of anger and kindness over retaliation. This practice, rooted in the Sermon on the Mount, not only transformed their character but also had a ripple effect, influencing those around them to consider a more compassionate approach to conflict. Equally compelling are the stories of communities dedicated to living out these teachings collectively. Imagine a church that makes it their mission to embody the Beatitudes in all they do. They open their doors to the marginalized, feed the hungry, and comfort the grieving. By doing so, they create a tangible expression of the kingdom of heaven on earth, drawing others to the faith not through mere words, but through living testament. Lastly, let us not forget the enduring relevance of the Golden Rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. This simple yet profound directive has influenced ethical frameworks far beyond the bounds of Christianity, finding a place in various cultures and religions. It challenges us to empathy and reciprocity, urging us to build bridges of understanding and compassion in a fragmented world. Through these myriad influences, individual transformation, collective action, and universal moral guidance, the Sermon on the Mount continues to shape the faith and practice of believers today. It calls us not to a life of mere observance, but to active participation in the unfolding of God's kingdom, here and now. In embracing these timeless teachings, we find ourselves not only changed but also as agents of change, bearing witness to the enduring power of Jesus' words on that sacred mount. When we meditate on the cultural representations of the Sermon on the Mount, we uncover a wealth of inspiration drawn from these profound teachings, spreading across the tapestry of human creativity. Historical depictions. Asterisk. Consider, for instance, the visual arts. Throughout the ages, artists have endeavored to capture the serenity and gravity of Jesus delivering these teachings. From the delicate strokes of medieval frescoes to the vivid imagery of Renaissance masterpieces, the Sermon on the Mount has been a beacon, a subject of monumental influence. Artists like Fra Angelico and Raphael have painted ethereal scenes showing Jesus surrounded by attentive multitudes, imbuing the canvas with a divine sense of peace and solemnity. The audience in these works is often depicted with expressions of wonder and reverence, capturing the transformational power of Jesus' words. Literature, too, has been profoundly shaped by the sermon. Writers have explored the depth and breadth of its teachings, weaving them into the fabric of narratives and poetry. Dante Alighieri, in his Divine Comedy, echoes the Beatitudes, using them as steps toward spiritual enlightenment and divine grace. The sermon has also found its echoes in the works of writers like John Milton and Leo Tolstoy, who grappled with its ethical demands and sought to illustrate its impact on human conduct and social justice. In these historical depictions, the Sermon on the Mount is not confined to a religious context alone but emerges as a universal call to a higher way of living. It speaks to the human condition, challenging and elevating it. Contemporary representations. Asterisk. Shifting to modern times, the Sermon on the Mount continues to resonate vividly, finding new expressions in contemporary media. In cinema, for instance, the teachings of Jesus have been explored and dramatized in various ways. Films like The Gospel According to St. Matthew, by Pier Paolo Pasolini, and Jesus of Nazareth, directed by Franco Zeffirelli, bring to life the ethos of the sermon, often framing it as the heart of Jesus' ministry. Furthermore, contemporary literature and music have adapted these age-old teachings to address today's challenges. In novels, the Beatitudes are interwoven into the struggles and triumphs of characters, making ancient wisdom relevant to modern dilemmas. Music, too, from classical compositions to modern hymns and even genres like rock and folk, have interpreted and celebrated the messages within the Sermon on the Mount, creating a bridge between the sacred and the secular. Symbolically, these modern adaptations often highlight themes of justice, peace, and moral integrity. They serve to remind us that the Sermon on the Mount is not a relic of the past but a living guide for contemporary life. In an age beset by conflict and moral ambiguity, these teachings offer clarity and hope, challenging individuals to reflect on their values and actions. Ultimately, whether through the canvas of an old master or the lens of a modern filmmaker, the Sermon on the Mount stands as a testament to the enduring power of Jesus' teachings. It continues to inspire and transform, urging humanity towards compassion, humility, and a deeper understanding of what it means to live a blessed life. As we draw to the close of this exploration, it is time to revisit the pivotal themes we have journeyed through. The Sermon on the Mount, nestled in the chapters of Matthew chapter 5 through 7, stands as a beacon of divine wisdom. We delved into its historical context, unveiling how Jesus' words were shaped by Jewish traditions and Roman political tensions. The teachings were not uttered in a vacuum but addressed a diverse assembly, resonating deeply with those who faced the daily struggle of living under external and internal turmoil. We reflected on key biblical texts and the profound parables contained within the sermon, which serve as moral compasses for believers. The Beatitudes, with their countercultural blessings, invited us to consider the virtues of mercy, meekness, and purity of heart. They called for a revolutionary rethinking of what it means to be blessed. Jesus' interpretation of the law, his emphasis on grace, and the principles of the kingdom of heaven summon each of us to a higher standard of living. Influential theologians like Augustine, Aquinas, and Luther have wrestled with these teachings, offering profound insights that have shaped Christian doctrine through the ages. We've also acknowledged the scholarly debates, the challenges posed by modern interpretations, and the comparative perspectives of other religious traditions, all contributing to a richer, more nuanced understanding of Jesus' sermon. The significance of archaeological discoveries cannot be understated, as they bridge the ancient past with our present understanding, affirming the historical reliability of the gospel accounts. Miraculous events, though often scrutinized, serve to deepen the faith of many, offering a tangible connection to the divine. The impact of the Sermon on the Mount extends far beyond personal piety. It influences Christian practices and testimonies globally, manifesting in acts of kindness, forgiveness, and an unwavering pursuit of righteousness. Artistic and cultural representations of the sermon continue to inspire, reminding us that these teachings remain vital and transformative. The enduring significance of the Sermon on the Mount lies in its timeless relevance. It urges modern believers to embody its principles, to be lights in a world often shadowed by despair. These teachings call us not only to introspection but to action, to live out the ideals of mercy, purity, and peace in our everyday lives. As we conclude, I invite you to carry forward this reflection. Subscribe to our channel to stay connected with content that nourishes the spirit. Like and comment to engage in meaningful dialogue, and share your feedback, for it is through community and shared wisdom that we grow together in our faith journey. Heavenly Father, we come before you today in awe of Jesus' profound words delivered in the Sermon on the Mount. We ask for your wisdom to truly understand and live by these teachings. Help us embrace the Beatitudes, to be merciful, pure in heart, and peacemakers. Lord, equip us to turn the other cheek, to love our enemies, and to forgive as we have been forgiven. Guide us to live a life reflective of the light Jesus brought to the world, to embody the salt of the earth as he taught. Let our prayers be sincere and our giving in secret, without seeking earthly recognition but yearning for your heavenly reward. Lord, let the principles of the kingdom of heaven nourish our spirits and direct our actions. Instill in us a hunger and thirst for righteousness, and let us experience the fullness of joy found in obedience to your word. As we strive to follow Jesus' footsteps, may our hearts be transformed and our minds renewed. May we hold on to the hope that surpasses understanding and the peace that comes only from you. Bless us with your presence, now and always. In Jesus' holy name, we pray. Amen.